Welcome to the program. My name is Marty Shenkman. I'm joined by a longtime friend and colleague, Bronwyn Martin. Bronwyn, why don't you tell everyone who you are, what you do, and we're going to talk about planning for clients with chronic disease and the challenges of aging, a really practical topic that seems to be evolving frequently. Bronwyn?
Sure. Yep, I'm Bronwyn Martin. Martin's Financial Consulting Group is my practice, and I focus on risk management and wealth management, and rely on accountants and estate planning attorneys to help give a comprehensive view of a client's estate.
So the issues of aging, I'm not going to quote statistics, but the population everyone knows is aging. There's a very significant number in terms of both absolute number and percentage of people that are over 65, over 75. Um, I remember reading that one of the fastest growing cohorts is people over age 85. Chronic disease could affect as many as 150 million people, depending which statistic you read. And as you age, as we age, the incidence of chronic disease grows, so it's more and more of an issue. And what we're going to try to do is talk about some of the practical planning implications. Most of these are not technical, but they're practical and they're important. And I can speak for me and what I see. In an awful lot of the cases, I don't see enough work done by all the allied advisors to try to address these issues. And I also see challenges in what we can do to address them. And we're going to talk about some of those that we're seeing come up kind of frequently in practice. And I think the take home is that for all advisors and all the allied disciplines, there's proactive steps that we can take to help clients prepare for these issues. I guess one of the threshold issues, again, not technical, but vitally important, Bronwyn, I find it's hard to coax people into talking about these things. I've had clients for years and years and years that have had family members with challenges, that they themselves have had challenges that are not always visible. And I think I'm pretty attuned because of family circumstances and a lot of the work that I do to looking and identifying some of the health challenges. And I can't always do it. How, how do you get people to talk to you about this? Are you able to usually get them to explain what challenges they have? For example, we have questions in our organizer forever. Do you have any health issues or any concerns that may affect your ability to handle your financial legal affairs? And most often we don't get any response to that.
Sometimes I wonder if it's empathy that's needed to ask some questions. The other thing I was thinking of when you asked that is I wonder, even though we have clients sometimes for many years, we don't re-ask those same questions. We may not ask, hey, has anything happened recently with your health that we need to readdress something, unless, something really bad goes wrong. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I need to talk to Marty. I need to talk to Bronwyn. Um,
I
so
think that's a great point. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think that's a
yeah,
really great
no,
point. I find as an estate planning attorney, and I'm sure my experience is not unique, other than certain high net worth families that were kind of loosely part of a family office type structure, whether it's a official family office or just their advisory team that we meet with periodically. A lot of clients, once their documents are signed, they don't come back. And I'm sure part of it is they don't find the process of talking about what we talk about as estate planners pleasant. I'm sure they don't appreciate and enjoy the cost of getting a bill. But we don't find that out. I think the asking that question periodically for financial advisors is a great tool because you may be the one person on the team for most clients that actually sees the client or communicates with the client regularly. And if that's part of your routine checklist, you can't be upsetting anyone because you ask everyone the question.
yeah. So you're right. The accountant only sees the client once or twice a year, um, and they're not really worried about the client's health or family dynamics or situations really. Um, and sometimes I may not be asking the right questions either, but I feel like I know that I'm interacting with the client more than an accountant, and certainly more than an estate planning attorney.
We may
So
not
maybe,
see the client for a decade or more.
yeah. So I think you had brought this up before, is that you wouldn't have known a situation about a current client if it hadn't have been for the wealth manager who somehow found out this information. That's probably because they're meeting with them several times a year to review their accounts, and take into account tax loss harvesting, for example, before the end of the calendar year. Um,
The particular situation we were talking about in preparing before we got started, in that case, the wealth advisor noticed, and kudos to her for doing so, some large disbursements for, let's just call it inappropriate activities that were indicative of an addiction issue.
mm,
And the wealth advisor was, paying attention and addressed it and got the client's permission to, discuss it with us. And we're now working on helping them. But as an estate planner, I don't know that I would ever see detailed like that. No one's going to present, even if I see a budget, which we don't often do, but even if we see a budget, no one's going to budget out drinking or drug abuse in their budget. We're not going to see it. So it was an astute catch by the wealth advisor.
mm,
But I think the team as a whole needs to be much more alert to some of the aging and health and chronic disease issues because everyone seems to have a different every client has a different relationship with each advisor, and certain clients may just be more comfortable talking to a particular advisor than the others.
right. Actually, I have a stat in front of me, Marty, that in 2024, the Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures Report estimates 6.9 million people aged 65 plus are living with Alzheimer's disease, with a $360 billion projection in 2024 costs. And as you know, alongside rising caregiver stress and loss of caregiver income.
It's
Um,
huge.
yeah.
And that's just one kind of dementia. And dementia is only one of the myriad of different issues that people could face with aging or
Hmm.
chronic disease.
Yeah. So yeah, so as you know, that's something that I'm passionate about is Alzheimer's disease, and figuring that out. Um, yeah. So how do we handle having greater alliances between the different advisors and seeing that there's a greater cross section of digging deeper into a client's situation. I feel
I,
like people are pretty open with me, but again, maybe it's because I've known them for years and we meet several times a year. Um,
I think the collaboration is really critical. And it's not just about coordinating a tax plan or an estate plan or, investment location decisions, but it's also about sharing this kind of information. And I think when you get all the advisors communicating and with web meetings, it's not like an expense where, you have to take hours and go to somebody's office. You can easily have a 30-minute Zoom meeting with the other advisors and the client even. But I think if the advisors communicate and the clients have to authorize it, you may pick up on something, an insurance consultant may pick up on something, the accountant may have some other thoughts. When you say, I'm a little concerned that, John Smith is starting to show some issues of aging and some challenges, maybe, oh yeah, you know what? The accountant says, I've started to notice a decline in his acumen on some of my calls too. And you start a whole conversation about it. So I think talking is very important because for example, and I don't know where the statistic came from or how they do it, but the numbers are something like 95%, 92% of the symptoms of chronic disease are invisible. So, unless you know to look for something or pick up on something that's an indirect indication that there's a challenge, we may not know. And I also find, because I've had clients that have had significant health issues, chronic disease, one I'm thinking of in particular, the husband had MS, and they were clients for over a decade. They never told me. And
Mm.
when I asked them how come they didn't tell me, the response, it was like, well, but if we told you, what could you do? But there's a lot that we can do. We're going to talk about some of it. So I think that's really the threshold issue, is trying to identify the problems. I think getting everyone on a team to share whatever points they've picked up on, trying to make the client feel comfortable and safe. And I think even educating the clients. The reason I'm asking these questions is not to be nosy, but because I can use this information to try to help you. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I just wrote down is that maybe clients, I think before you had mentioned clients might be embarrassed to say that there's an issue, um, but none of us can correctly plan for them. I mean, as you know, there's a lot of costs involved when somebody has MS. So how are we going to carve out to make sure there's enough money, for the care of that person, let alone the estate planning side that's needed and whatever else is needed, as you're very familiar with. So um, yeah, maybe we have to learn better how to have our clients open up to us so that we're doing the best for them because we know all these situations.
so one of the things that's also interesting, and it's really in its infancy, and I really need to talk to others, but I'll just bring it up here. We have started routinely recording meetings, having them transcribed, and then using AI to generate a summary of the meeting, because then I find I can focus more on the client that I'm meeting with if I don't have to be taking notes. And I
Yeah,
thought I had reduced, virtually eliminated the distraction that taking notes created, because I've done it by typing for years and I can type without looking and everything else. But it's still, to me, an incredible difference having AI take the notes instead of me even having that little bit of distraction, which I didn't realize how significant it was till I stopped doing it, of typing my own notes. So having AI take the notes, I think will let us focus more on the nuances and the subtleties of what we may see with a client. And something else, and let me get a couple more points out, then I'll get your comments, because this is also new. And it really started with COVID. In the beginning, during COVID, I was very concerned, how am I going to possibly meet with somebody if it's not in person? I was really fearful, concerned that meeting via web, I'm not going to have the same level of interaction or observance of the client's demeanor to really understand where they're coming from or how they really feel. And to my pleasant surprise, it's actually, maybe not in every case, but I find in most cases, seeing somebody on a Zoom and interacting on a Zoom can even be better than meeting in an office. Because when somebody would come into my office, they would dress, they would prepare, they'd plan for it. If they had a health issue, they'd, pick a time of day. Um, it was more formal. When you see somebody in their home, they may have a dog on a couch behind them. You never know. But you start to see more of, they're wearing their favorite fuzzy slippers and drinking out of their bare coffee mug. I think you can pick up on things in a more comfortable, relaxed um, environment the client is controlling than in the meeting in an office. So I think that all this helps. One of the other things that I've seen, and I've been experimenting with this. So when I have a long transcript from a meeting with a client, I can say to AI, review the transcript and give me specific references and quote the exact language that the client used, and then describe something I'm concerned about. Like if I felt the client was having discomfort with the plan that was proposed, identify everything. When you have an hour, 2 hour meeting with a client, you may get a sense that the client had some discomfort, but what really was that discomfort? Or the client had some comprehension issues on what you were discussing. But when you have a transcript and you can have AI like instantly pluck out of the transcript 10 quotes of things that the client said on that specific characteristic or issue, it helps. Um, I don't think quantify is the right word, but it helps really document for me as the lawyer what those issues may be. It's an interesting and different application that I haven't seen really done much or much talked about with AI.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm finding that there are businesses popping up all over the place now that are essentially very specific bots, AI bots. Um, but you mentioned something earlier that when you're typing your notes or writing your notes in a meeting, it's hard to it's distracting. And it's interesting. I was at a couple of conferences last year, and I mean, I don't know how many conferences was that, but I remember two conferences in particular talking about how multitasking is not good. I don't know if it was a decade ago or 2 decades ago. It was like, why can't you multitask and do five things at once? And the studies now have shown that, taking notes and trying to listen to the client at the same time, for example, you're not going to capture everything. So I think you hit the nail on the head where, we use AI to transcribe and then we go through and pick and choose or have AI search again for what you just talked about.
No, that's a
Find,
very good point, and I've read some of the same studies. I can't remember them well enough to quote them, but I think the take home was that we're just fooling ourselves thinking we can multitask. And when you're trying to pick up, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, the nuances of a client starting to fade intellectually because of cognitive issues or health issues, or struggling with the complexity of a plan being proposed by any of the advisory team. Um, when you get the transcript and have AI pull those things out, it becomes much more apparent what the issue is, which gives us a much greater ability to specifically direct help to the client. Let's change gears. Why don't we kind of it's the expected thing, but let's talk about it. One of the issues or one of the objectives when you have a client that's getting on in years or has chronic disease or other challenges is to get their estate planning documents tailored to what they need. And I guess the first thing is to make sure they have estate planning documents, because we all find clients that, haven't revised their documents in decades, and they certainly need something new. But let's talk about some of the what I'll call core documents and how they may be modified to address some of the issues that clients with aging or chronic disease or other disabilities or health issues may face. So, as one example, I prefer to focus on a revocable trust and minimize the importance of a financial durable power of attorney, because you can integrate into a revocable trust a lot of protections that just are not commonly done under a power of attorney. You still obviously want a durable power of attorney because some assets may not be able to be transferred into the trust, like retirement assets or maybe a claim or something. But I think refocusing on a revocable trust is safer for the client. And some of the things that I've seen built in, or that you can build in, or that we've built into revocable trusts, are the following. I like to assign a separate tax ID number for the revocable trust when a client's getting on in years or has a health challenge. I can't point to any statistical data, but I believe anecdotally that it reduces the risk of elder financial abuse. And I don't like the phrase elder financial abuse, because somebody may not be elderly, but because of you know a chronic disease may be facing challenges. Our social security numbers just seem so accessible because they're used in medical records and other places where I wish they weren't. So getting a separate tax ID number on the revocable trust, I think, creates some impediment. Um, I like to see the revocable trust funded. I think there's much more flexibility with the revocable trust than a financial power of attorney to deal with how the fiduciary arrangements are structured. So for a client that's perfectly fine and well and having no issues, they could be their own sole trustee. But as the client starts to fade or experience more challenges, maybe you have a co-trustee with them. Certainly, even if a client is fine, you name a successor trustee. If the client doesn't have sufficient trustworthy family or friends to name, and many don't, you can use an institutional or professional trustee. So that's another protection. You could require the consent of a non-adverse party, one of their advisors, to modify or revoke the trust so that somebody that is starting to experience challenges and somebody's trying to take advantage of them, well, they can't modify or revoke the trust. That home health aide is not going to be named the new beneficiary unless the client's accountant of 30 years agrees to that modification in the trust, which obviously they won't. So that's another protection. I like integrating a trust protector and giving them not only some of the typical powers of removing and replacing a trustee, but the power to ask for a accounting of the trustee, a right to modify special needs provisions in the trust, and other oversight provisions. I'll just give one last example, and then see if you have any comments or thoughts on it. Um, Depending on the circumstances, we've actually integrated care management provisions, not in terms of care management, but in terms of evaluation. So we might provide that, depending on the status of the client, yearly or perhaps quarterly, an independent care manager, licensed care manager who's not involved in the care for the client, will meet at the client's, wherever the client's living, not via Zoom, and evaluate the client and issue a written report to the trustee, the trust protector, and maybe the person named under the client's healthcare proxy. So that multiple different people get an independent report from somebody not involved in the client's care, so that if there's something inappropriate going on, hopefully it'll get identified much sooner. So those are just some of the ways that you can modify the documents, and I think it's a little different than just the run of the mill. Make sure you have a healthcare proxy and power of attorney. I think we can do more, and those are some examples of it. Any thoughts or comments, Bronwyn?
Yeah, I love that idea of having an independent care manager coming and evaluating. And I assume, that's something that the client would have to have signed off on when they were in a fair state.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. But certainly one would hope that they'd see the benefit of that. I love that idea. Um, I wonder also if there can be like an independent way to vet a co-trustee or successor trustee, or is there some language that could be put into the trust to say at the time of the co-trustee's appointment, is there also an independent mechanism in place to, I don't know, check the veracity of them and that they're not uh, going to improperly manage the client's assets?
I think some of the ways to do that, a lot of people are still most comfortable naming friends and family. Um, and if they do that, having co-trustees means there's at least two parties. Having a trust protector, with one caveat I want to discuss in a second, that has the authority to remove and replace the trustee, are all ways to have checks and balances on the trustees. I think that one of the key concepts when we're planning for aging clients and clients with chronic disease or other challenges is checks and balances. I mean, that's why I like an advisory team. I like having an independent wealth advisor, an independent accountant, an independent estate planning attorney. And, if you use what we just talked about, an independent care manager, even if there's issues with one or two advisors, boy, to have four bad eggs in the same team just seems pretty remote. Um, I like using institutional trustees. I like having
To,
family members and institutional trustees, because now you have checks and balances. What mix depends in part on the size of the wealth, who the trustees are that are available for that type of client, uh, based on wealth and other characteristics. Most institutions have minimum asset sizes before they'll accept a trusteeship. So that may narrow the scope depending on what the client has. But but I've also seen, trust companies where, for a variety of reasons, where a beneficiary starts to have cognitive challenges or addiction challenges, some trustees are just, they're not, that's just not what they're adept at. They may be great at handling an active real estate business, which a lot of trustees are not, but you need to find the right fit of a trustee. But again, that's why having a trust protector makes so much sense. If it turns out you picked a trustee that was great for the client at age 50, but at age 75, the client's needs are so different, it might behoove everybody. It could be good for the trustee being removed and good for the client to get a new trustee that's really geared up for that.
Yeah, and I like the corporate trustee a lot because they're more objective. The other thing that is part of what you're talking about, but we haven't actually said it, is that typically a trustee or who's a friend or family or spouse, let's they're, they're probably in the same age bracket. They typically tend to be the same age bracket, which means that their health is maybe declining as quickly or faster than your clients. Um, so that certainly needs to be checked.
Yeah, I think all the practical issues should be talked about with the client.
Yeah. So ideally, I always think of a corporate trustee. It's just that's in perpetuity. There's complete objectiveness. And typically there's a sliding scale in terms of fee, like, 1 million versus 30 million. It's usually higher if it's a smaller dollar amount and then less the more money there is to manage. So,
Let me make a couple of comments on the healthcare documents, which could be a medical power of attorney or healthcare proxy, depending what you call it. A
mhm.
living will, which is a statement of healthcare, which is a HIPAA release to authorize people to access medical records. And if somebody is in a terminal condition, a POLST, a physician order for life-sustaining treatment. I think in New York it's a MOLST, medical authorization for life-sustaining treatment. And if I didn't get the acronym exactly correct, forgive me. But um, the healthcare documents need to address some of the decisions. So, for example, post-COVID, during COVID, people were, talking to family and healthcare agents on an iPad or iPhone because that's all that was available because of the quarantine issues. So we've added a provision that permits communication by the healthcare agent to medical providers via FaceTime or Zoom or an iPad. We've indemnified the medical providers for relying on that. I haven't had it be challenged, but I think those are issues that we need to think about because depending on the circumstances, those may not be limited to that one point in history. End of life decisions are important to talk about. Religious considerations, when you start to get into end of life decisions, religious considerations are important for a lot of people. And it can go both ways. It could be they have a particular belief and they want that respected. They may have no longer desired to have the restrictions of the faith they grew up in adhere to. But then you have to explain that too to avoid the kind of um, friction that can occur when some of the family assume they want their faith based beliefs adhered to, and in fact they don't. Experimental treatment is something that's important. Many people want to have whatever can be done, even if it is experimental, but that should be specifically authorized. Another topic, I'll call it agent alignment. If you have a particular challenge, will the agent that you want to name be comfortable or willing, even if they're not comfortable, will they be willing to make the decisions that you need? Um, New York, I believe, is on the cusp of signing, the Governor Hochul signing a right to die bill, which would make New York, I think, the 12th state, give or take. So it's not an anomaly. It's a growing number of states with this type of legislation. But many people are going to have religious or moral or philosophical discomfort with making those decisions. So is the agent the right person? If you live in a state where that legislation does not exist, you may need to be moved and establish residency in a state where end of life, right to die, assisted suicide, whichever phrase is appropriate based on the legislation exists. And that's something you need to authorize the agent to do. Otherwise, will your agent have the right to change your state of residence? And that takes action ahead of time. So agent alignment, the range of different decisions, religious issues, um, these are all things that if you can get the clients to address them, can avoid a lot of potential conflict. I mean, we all know the Terry Schiavo tragedy, and however you felt about the decisions concerning her feeding tube, It was tragic for anybody and everybody involved, especially for Terry. What were her wishes? And think of the trauma on both sides of the family having to fight over something so horrific to deal with. So getting clients to address these issues is important. Some clients, when they're really facing these issues and they're not theoretical, it gets very difficult emotionally to do. Other clients, when they have the realization that this stuff is real, get much more specific and determined to address what they want done. So you'll see a whole spectrum of different thoughts. Bronwyn, any comments or thoughts?
No, I totally agree. I'm wondering sometimes if, based on what you were just saying, Marty, that uh, clients don't know what to be asking for as part of their documents, and um, just you know what I mean. So you brought up some good issues. Like most young people think, I don't need any estate planning. I don't have any money yet to speak of, or something like that. But Terry Schiavo case is,
She was very young, very
yeah,
tragic.
exactly. Um, so that sort of leads me to another direction: is how do we encourage or make sure that our younger clients do get these documents in place? I mean, it's easy
I
for me to say you need to talk to an estate planning attorney to get your estate documents, and then 10 years later, I'm finding out they still haven't got them in place. And fortunately, nothing's happened. I've had clients who have had young children. I keep saying you've got to get your estate documents in place. God forbid anything happened to the two of you and you've got young children at home. And, you know, every meeting, hey, how's it going? Yep, yep, we're almost there or whatever. Uh, just their mortality is put keeps being put off, to think about that. So
I
sort
think
of another
those
direction to go in terms of topics there. But yeah, mentioning Terry Schiavo is really
you
underscores the importance of, no matter what your age is, you need these documents in place. And do we cover? We can't cover all the bases, I don't think.
you made several really important points. I want to talk about an example of feeding in terms of your comment, which is very, very point that a lot of clients don't understand even the decisions involved. So let's talk about feeding for a second. And then let's also talk about younger clients because that's a really valid point. But I think the solution to that is exactly what you, Bronwyn, are doing. And I wish every other financial advisor in the country would do what you just described. Financial advisors are making a concerted effort to be more actively involved in estate planning. But I think some of the most important things to do is not getting an AI program to review the insurance trust a lawyer did and see if you can come up with something, but to make sure the clients have the basic documents that they need, that their kids who are adults have the basic documents that they need, and their documents are a little more modern than something written on papyrus. And too often clients just don't do that. So I think the most important thing that every financial advisor can do because of the different relationship and the regularity of meetings is to make sure that clients have addressed this stuff. And I think if you persist, you as the financial advisor will be the catalyst to getting this done, where I, as the lawyer, they haven't come to my office yet. So I think that's really, really important. Let me go back to the other comment you made and talk about it because I think it's really very, very spot on as well. Clients don't understand a lot of the issues, and I think even advisors, professionals sometimes feel uncomfortable talking about some of these issues. So, you know, do you want a feeding tube? What is a feeding tube? Do you want to be fed? Do you want to be fed artificially? How do you want to be fed? So I have a client who's actually a pastor, and he felt that in his view, when the and I'm sure there was a biblical connection to it that I forgive me, I just don't recall, but he viewed feeding as if somebody can feed him with a spoon and he can, even with their assistance, eat, that's appropriate and should be done. He doesn't want to be starved. But he viewed the idea of having a surgical procedure to have a peg inserted into his stomach in an operating room as not being the type of feeding that he felt his faith required of him. Different people view it differently, but I think honestly, a lot of people have no idea the distinction between them. I have one client, very, very bright, sophisticated physician, and he actually gave me some studies, which I have somewhere, because he read all the medical literature on this stuff. And he said that there's actually a negative association with longevity in certain types of artificial feeding, because of aspiration and other things. So he had a different view of it. Now, as a non-medical expert, I can only go so far, but we can raise some of the issues. And if a client's interested in pursuing it, they can speak to their religious advisor, their physician, and they should have those conversations if they're important. But there's only so far that we can go. But somebody else on the planning team may have more expertise or the client may have a different comfort level with them to explore some of this. So, if we take a look at just the feeding issue and the experimental care issues and end of life decisions and religious decisions, we could spend hours and hours going through just the healthcare documents. And I think it makes sense to do that, but most clients are not going to be comfortable with the level of detail and not with the cost involved. So it becomes a challenge. But again, I think if you're having an ongoing discussion, if the attorney included you in one of the review meetings for the planning, so you knew what they did, and you're having ongoing discussions for years every quarter with the client, somehow some of these things may come to light, and you could say, hey, John and Jane, you kind of, cut to the chase on this when you did your documents and you didn't really delve into this, but it sounds like some of these, faith-based or other perspectives on this are important to you. You should really sit down with your attorney and your doctor and go through them.
Yeah. And the same can be said too with like I recently brought on a client and we're working with the estate planning attorney. They're worried that if the money that's going to their children, the son-in-law is like he's an alcoholic or they're worried that he could tap into the money or he'd get the money that the daughter inherits. And so we wanted to make sure that it's very clear in the estate planning documents for the trust that we've set up, how that's to be handled. So in a similar vein, making sure the instructions are very, very clear. Who can handle the money? Who's allowed to give out the money? What type of the trustee, as well as taking into account religious-based thought on care. With the healthcare proxy. Just there's so much to think about, and I wonder how much does get missed. And so that needs that review or, like you said, attention by the other advisors on the client's team. Be like, hey, something's amuck here. Let's readdress, this document for this trust.
You just said something that is one of the frustrating realities that I face with too many clients. I don't understand the concept at all, but many clients have this obsession with simplicity, and they think trusts are inherently complicated. But let's use the example you just gave. So, you know, let's say mom and dad have one child, a daughter, leaving their entire estate to daughter. Yes, it sounds simpler to leave it outright to daughter, and she can do what she wants. If she's married to husband who has addiction issues, he may be manipulative and pressure her and gain access to that money and just dissipate it, sometimes quickly, on whatever addiction issues he faces. So is that simple? It's a disaster. It's not simple. Is putting it in trust complicated? I don't really think so. For most professional advisors, trusts are pretty standard, but I see clients and I have clients and I come across clients that fight me on using a trust. If the money were even in a trust with the daughter as the sole trustee, she probably still could be pressured by her husband to dissipate the money. But if there's a trust protector, the trust protector could talk to the daughter on the side and say, and she could tell him what's going on. The trust protector can be the heavy, if that's a non-technical word I can use, and remove and replace the daughter and name an institution where every trust officer stops working and goes home at 5 o'clock every day or 3 o'clock or whatever it is, and not take those crazy, screaming, hollering phone calls from the spouse with the addiction issues. Um, so creating a trust structure for everybody as a default, I think, is a minimum to deal with whatever kinds of issues arise, and building in some flexibility in that trust with document generation software is not complicated. Um, I think should be the minimum. But I think it's important for all the advisors on the team to communicate that to the client. I don't know where clients get these ideas. And I've even had other advisors argue with me, well, why would you keep money in trust after age 30? Just pay it outright. Well, apart from GST planning, which because we all love talking about GST, how do you know there's not going to be a divorce or a health issue or a mental health issue or an addiction issue arising after that age or a lawsuit? So we all kind of have to get on the same page. And what I find, and it's not particular to any advisory group, but there are those amongst us professional advisors who will pander to whatever really silliness the client says and just yes the client because they want to keep the client happy and they don't want the friction of telling the client that they're making a mistake. But once the money is in a trust, you can do lots of things to modify that trust to deal with the circumstances. Once the money is outright or distributed out, whether it was in trust age 30 or not, or an outright bequest, you've lost the ability to really do that. So I think it's important that we all kind of get on the same page and look for the protection of the client, not just pandering to what I often find to be an unreasonable focus on simplicity. I mean, I think if there's three options to get the client's goal accomplished, why not take the simpler one? But simple should never be the primary objective. Protecting your loved ones should be, including protecting yourselves. I mean, it's the same thing where people will set up a revocable trust. They don't fund it because they don't want to bother, and they won't spend the few extra dollars to get a trust protector and maybe a co-trustee and some of the care management provisions added to the trust. So they get a very simple boilerplate revocable trust. Yes, that can avoid probate if that's their goal, but most of us do get on in years and age and experience some of the challenges of aging. So a more robust plan is certainly, I think, a better approach.
Yeah, exactly. Um, the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is also um, making sure that the assets inside the trust match the client's age, perhaps. Um, when they're going to start needing to draw upon those assets more heavily
Sure.
to rebalance the portfolio so that it's you're not risking having to take out money when there's a sudden market drop.
Are
That
you
could,
suggesting I shouldn't have everything in NVIDIA?
yeah, um, yeah, so that yeah, at the time of need, you're not 100% in NVIDIA that could suddenly have bad news and it drops 30%.
So I think that's part of the broader comment you made earlier that it's really important to reassess as time goes on. And clients are often hesitant to go back to their estate planning attorneys because, gee, I have a will. Yeah, but life has changed. One of the most common excuses, because I always like to ask people, where have you been for the last 20 years? And the comment is almost always the same theme, no matter how they phrase it, it's something to the effect of nothing's changed. I mean, what in the world is the same as it was 10 years ago? I mean, the world just seems to be changing at a faster and faster clip. So the whole advisory team needs to make sure clients review everything. So yes, as they get older, their cash flow needs are going to change. Their tolerance of risk is going to change. I know mine has. I'm not, I don't have 30 years of work ahead of me that if the market tanks, I have time for it to come back and I can earn what I've lost. So
So that's a
my
relief. So you don't have 100% in NVIDIA.
no, I actually don't. But I think reassessing that's important. Another example, which I see frequently, and I'm sure you see it all the time, somebody set up an insurance trust 30 years ago when their kids were minors, and they're still paying in every year to the insurance. Now, there's nothing wrong with insurance, and maybe that insurance can be repurposed now, maybe to pay an estate tax or for liquidity because they have assets in a family business. But just because an insurance policy made sense 30 years ago when you had minor kids doesn't mean that it makes any sense today. Maybe you can exchange it for something that has some kind of long-term care feature. But I find that inertia, people like the status quo. They don't like to question it. But all that should be reviewed. Similarly for the accountant on the team, as a client gets older, what can you bring up to help them protect themselves? This is all fair game for all the advisors to talk about. And I think when clients start to hear the discussion from different advisors, even if you as a financial, wealth advisor frame it differently or with different terminology than I do, they see the common themes of the messages, and I think they're more apt to take action when they hear things from all their advisors.
Yeah, and that's where that continuity falls into play. Yeah, when I ask clients, especially people that I've just brought on as a new client, do you have your estate planning documents in place? Oh yeah, we did them when the kids were born, and
You're
nothing's
right.
nothing's changed. Just they're now over 21. I'm like, what? So you've got 25-year-old wills, and you think that's fine because the only thing that's different is the kids are grown up. So
No,
yeah.
everything changes. Um, so I think we've covered a lot of these issues, and I think it's important for all the advisors to broach all these issues with clients as they start to age or as they develop health challenges, chronic disease, disability, or even addiction issues, which really wasn't our topic, but we kind of talked about it. And I think it's important for collaboration so we can all, if you will, trade notes and help pick up on things and piece things together better. This may be an inappropriate analogy, but there was an old story about seven blind people feeling an elephant. One's touching the trunk, one's touching the tail, one's touching a leg, one's touching its stomach, and they're describing it. But when we as advisors get all the different data that each of us pick up on, I think we can, assess the client or the elephant, if you will, much better and make better recommendations. And your point of reassessing whether it's an investment allocation, an insurance trust or policy, when you want to start adding some of these more robust provisions to a revocable trust is all very important. And one of the issues, and we see it as advisors all the time. I'll give a different example than give an example apropos to aging and chronic disease. But when clients are selling a business, obviously before they even start the process, it'd be great to shift the value of the business at a low value into an irrevocable trust, get it out of their estate, and so on and so forth. But so many clients wait to they almost have a signed contract. Some even sign the contract before coming back to their advisors because, listen, if I'm not going to really sell the business, I don't want to go through all this planning and the cost and complexity of it. But by the time they know it's going to be the real deal, the value has gone up and they may have an assignment of income doctrine and they can't really do the planning. It's the same thing with aging and chronic illness. Clients are often uncomfortable dealing with these issues. They're uncomfortable confronting reality. They're uncomfortable paying professional fees and making their life more complex with an array of trusts. But if they wait until they need it, it's often too late. So getting them to slowly progress down that path makes a world of sense. Um, Brahman, do you have any closing comments or other questions you think we should talk about?
So when you were talking about your last point there, Marty, the one word came to mind, communication, and it's what is helpful in personal relationships, whether it's with a spouse or, a good friend, is communication. And that communication is really important here between the client and the advisor, advisor to advisor, and then advisor back to client. Communication, whether it's knowing what are the right questions to ask, getting the client to open up, and getting advisors to tell the other advisor, hey, look, I just met with a client. We've got a problem. How do we solve it for the client's sake? So communication is what I want to end on. One word.
I think the topic that we talked about today is really critically important for so many clients. I kind of believe, and I fall prey to it too as a tax nerd. We get so involved in highly technical GST allocation decisions and how to draft a governing law or situs provision in a trust and so on and so forth. But it's these more mundane practical things that really do have life-changing impact on our clients. And even though it's, not more exciting than watching paint dry, addressing these practical issues is critical. And we need each other. We need the whole advisory team to do it for all the reasons that we discussed. And we need to try to collectively educate clients on dealing with these issues and not just taking what they perceive as the simpler, easy way out, because this is inevitable. We all hope that we live to 100 and pass away in our sleep with no issues, but we're not all so blessed. And often we find that the road becomes very difficult. So preparing, which we all know how to help clients do, is really valuable. So thank you, Bronwyn, and thank you everyone for joining us. I know it was not technical, but hopefully practical and helpful. And I really encourage all of you collectively as a team for every client to try to help identify these issues and collectively guide our clients to take steps that make sense.